Hello Magic players and collectors, welcome back to the Land Library. I'm your librarian, and in this episode of Latest Loadout, I'm going over the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles set. This set released March 6th of 2026 and is a standard Legal Universes Beyond set all about TMNT. Now personally, I've never been very into TMNT, so I'm not well versed in lore, characters, or locations, but I'm sure some bigger fans will recognize a lot of the lands I'm about to cover. And since I'm not really all that well versed, I'm not sure what else to put in this intro, so let's just get into it. You know the drill. First up is basics. There is a set of regular basics and two sets of full arts. The first is the rooftop basics, featuring different city skylines, and the turtles jumping across those rooftops. Then the second set are a bit more special because they are not in play boosters. It's the pizza basics, which are from the pizza bundle. However, both full arts can also be in collector packs, including surge foils, which are exclusive to collector packs. But before I move on, I should also mention that the pizza basics are a bit controversial because they kind of appear to be AI art. There are quite a few inconsistencies that point towards this, like the prong of the sai on the mountain just disappears under the pizza, kind of weird nebulous pizza fog on the forest, and the pizza on the swamp being lifted only from the top, which is just not how gravity works. Now, I'm not saying it for sure is AI. It could just be sloppy human-made art in a similar style to what AI makes, but regardless of how it was made, it's not especially good or well received because it definitely looks like AI art, which a lot of people are unhappy with. Moving on though, there's only one other reprinted land in the main set. Escape Tunnel, which can tap and sack to search for a basic and put it in play tapped, or tap and sack to make a target creature with 2 or less power unblockable until end of turn. And while not in the main set, Undercity Sewers is available in packs as a bonus sheet card. Also, since it's a bonus sheet card, it doesn't change its format legality, which currently doesn't really mean much since Murders at Karlov Manor is still standard legal, but when that set gets rotated out, this print won't keep Undercity Sewers in standard. But that new escape tunnel I just mentioned right before this will keep it in standard because that is in the main set as a regular card. Anyways, what Undercity Sewers actually does is it has basic subtypes, in this case island and swamp, so it gets all the benefits of that, like making blue or black mana and being much more interactable. But then it simply enters tap and surveils one when it enters. Then, of course, over in the Commander set, Command Tower is getting new art. Actually, all of the lands in this one have new art, so there won't be any rapid fire section just like in the Final Fantasy video, but back to Command Tower, this land taps for a mana of any color in your commander's color identity, which I'm sure everyone knows, but I always say it anyway. And for something else we see pretty frequently, Ash Barrens, which I don't explain nearly as often, because it usually is in rapid fire, but this one can tap for a colorless or has basic land cycling 1, so you can pay 1 mana to discard it from your hand and search your library for a basic and put that basic into your hand. In the same vein, we've got another common fetch land, Evolving Wilds, which taps and sacks to search your library for a basic and put it in play tapped. And what's this? Another card that does the exact same thing? Vibrant Cityscape. Although, given how new it is, it hasn't had the time to start being reprinted a lot, and this is its first reprint. But back to frequently reprinted fetch lands, there's Fabled Passage, which taps and sacks to search your library for a basic, put it in play tapped, and then if you control 4 or more lands, that basic gets untapped. Moving away from fetch lands, but staying with frequently printed lands, we've got Exotic Orchard, which taps for a mana of any color that a land an opponent controls could produce. Notably, it says color, not type, so it can't make colorless mana. And Path of Ancestry, which enters tapped and can tap to produce a mana of any color in your commander's color identity, with the addition of scrying 1 if that mana was spent on a creature sharing a creature type with your commander, which does include your commander itself. Obviously, your commander has the same creature type as your commander. Now, there's just a couple of rarely seen lands before we move on to some cycles. We've got City of Brass, which taps for a mana of any color, but it deals 1 damage to yourself every time it becomes tapped for any reason. And Grand Coliseum, which enters tapped, can tap for a colorless or can tap for any color at the cost of 1 damage to yourself. Unlike City of Brass, this damage only happens when this ability is used, not just whenever it's tapped. And this is only its 3rd print ever, with the previous print from Commander 2016, so it's been a decade since its last print. Now for some cycles, although they're not complete cycles. In fact, one of them, the Bicycles, only has 1 card. Rain-Slicked Cops. This land was introduced last set and is already getting a reprint. And it has basic subtypes, specifically Forest and Island, so it gets all those benefits, and otherwise it has Cycling too, or it comes in tapped if you play it. The next cycle is the Bicycle's race friend, the Battlelands, which has a few more representatives, with Cinderglade, Smoldering Marsh, Sodden Verdure, Sunken Hollow, and Vernal Fen. These lands also have basic subtypes and enter tapped unless you control at least 2 basics. Then we've got a few check lands, Dragonskull Summit, Hinterland Harbor, and Rootbound Crag. These lands enter tapped unless you control a land with their corresponding basic types, and then they just tap for their colors after that. Following that is another cycle with 3 reprints, the Thriving Lands. The Thriving Lands have a primary color, and when they enter tapped and choose a color other than their primary color, and then can tap for either of those colors. These are represented by Thriving Grove, Thriving Isle, and Thriving Moor. Finally, the last cycle is the Bond Lands, with 2 representatives, Spire Garden and Undergrowth Stadium. These lands enter tapped unless you have at least 2 opponents, and then just tap for either of their colors. Now, there is another cycle of lands that's a functional reprint, but not technically reprints, so they're here in new lands, but I put them first to kind of bridge the gap. It's a cycle of enemy-colored life gain duels, and I suppose these are the other half of the refuge cycle of life gains, since those are only allied colors, but there's still a regular full cycle of all 10 that get very commonly reprinted that make these only new in name. But anyways, these enter tapped and you gain 1 life when they enter, and then they just tap for a mana of either of their colors. These new ones include Dimension X, Foot Headquarters, Illegitimate Business, Mutant Town, and TCRI Building. But for something actually new, Northampton Farm. This land can tap for a colorless, pay a generic and tap to exile a creature you own, or pay 2 generic, tap and sack to return 1 card it exiled to the battlefield, and return all other cards it exiled to your hand. This also has an extended art version, and it's the only one that got one, actually. Next up, Turtle Lair. Unfortunately, this land doesn't have the layer subtype, which I'm very disappointed about, but it does tap for a colorless and tap for a mana of any color, but it can only be spent on casting a ninja or turtle. And the extra option to pay 3 generic and tap to make a target ninja or turtle unblockable until end of turn. Now, over in the commander set, there's Hidden Hideout, which enters tapped and taps for a mana of any color in your commander's color identity, or for 2 generic, it taps to give target creature you control that has a counter on it of any kind, it just has to be a counter, it gets lifelink until end of turn. And the last new land is Big Apple 3am, which enters tapped and chooses any color to lock into and taps for that color of mana, or for 5 generic, it taps to make a 1/1 rat token for each opponent you have. Let's start with the weakest link, the life gain duels. These have practically no impact outside of sealed, since all of the previous life gain duels in the same colors are already available in literally all formats. The only real difference is the number of life gains you can play is now doubled. And while life gain duels are fairly regularly used, doubling the number of them in a deck doesn't usually mean much. There are some exceptions, like having Foot Headquarters and Scoured Barrens in your Karlov deck doesn't hurt, but it kind of barely helps. They're not bad by any means, but they're trying to fill a role that's already filled. Northampton Farm is up next, and it's such a weird card. It can exile your own things and bring them back, which is okay protection to prevent them from being destroyed, or fizzle your opponent's spells at target, or even take back stolen creatures, except it's really mana expensive to do so, and it sacrifices itself, so you only get to use it one time, and even then, it only returns one thing to the battlefield, so you still have to recast everything else. Not to mention, if it's destroyed before you can return your creatures, they just get stuck in exile, which means it's much more effective as just an exile outlet, but that's a very rarely wanted thing. There are cards that care about exiling, like Cosmogoyf or Ketramos, to give it a niche to fill, but boy is it a small niche. Turtle Layer is also pretty niche, but has a much bigger one. It's pretty solid ninja support, which very much was already a thing before this set, and turtle support, which was much less of a thing before this set. And making something unblockable is really good for ninjutsu and the new sneak mechanics, which are both very heavily used by ninjas. It's also already quite common to run lands that make creatures unblockable, like Access Tunnel or Rogue's Passage, in ninja decks, but Turtle Lair is just a straight upgrade to Rogue's Passage, in the context of a ninja deck, costing one less for the unblockable ability, and it can tap for colored mana for ninjas. But it's basically useless outside of a ninja deck, or a turtle deck, I suppose. It's more useful in a ninja deck, though. Then Big Apple 3 AM is a bit of a weird one too. It could be good or it could be terrible. Locking into a color and entering tapped is fine or whatever, but the ability to create rats is what really matters for how good it is. 5 mana and a tap is a lot of mana, but it makes rats equal to the number of opponents, and the bigger the game, the more rats you get for the same amount of mana. The classic 4-person commander game means 3 rats for 5 mana, which is a pretty decent exchange. But later game, or if you're just like in a smaller 1v1, you make 1 rat for 5 mana, which is pretty bad. However, Commander is not required to be a 4-person game, which means you could have a group of 5 players, or maybe you want to play the classic 4-way, but with teams of 2 for Two-Headed Giant, which would get you like 6 rats for 5 mana. Granted, larger groups like that are much less common, so you're probably getting 3 or less rats, which doesn't exactly make this a good land, but I still really like its potential. And the best new land is Hidden Hideout. Entering tapped isn't really an issue since it's a commander land, and it makes any colored mana that's relevant to your deck, so it can go in anything. And then its ability to give lifelink has a pretty reasonable mana cost, although its restriction to creatures with counters makes it a little less strong. Counters aren't the hardest thing to get, but they're not always a thing your deck will care about, so it can kinda just be stuck as a command tower clone if you're not getting counters. But lifelink on potentially any creature can go kinda crazy with big creatures like Impervious Great Worm, Yargle and Multani, or everyone's favorite broken comboer, Jumbo Cactar, to get a ton of life, or with cards that get huge value from life gain, like Ageless Entity, Defiant Bloodlord, or Nykthos Paragon. Better yet, just mix them both. Although the things that care about life gain usually already have lots of options, so this isn't really like a broken or novel concept, or just another solid card to add to the list of options. For Standard, this is a 1 out of 5. This set's lands are doing nothing meaningful to impact Standard, but it does include new lands in the format, so it has to get at least something. So, 1 point. For Commander, it's doing a little more. This is a 3 out of 5. The better lands in this one are from the Commander set, and they have interesting interactions, but aren't, like, huge. And even some of the main set lands are better in Commander. Nothing crazy, but some decent additions to Commander. The theme is a 5 out of 5. The theming is super strong, everything is very in line with the TMNT universe. the art, the card names, even a few lands tying in mechanics with like the ninjas, turtles, and rats. This is pretty expected of a Universes Beyond set, but true nonetheless. For art, this is a 4 out of 10. Everything having new art is great, and I do like a lot of it, but there's one extended art and one bonus sheet card. There's no borderless, there's no showcase, there's like nothing with multiple arts outside of the basics. This severe lack of special prints, along with the controversial pizza basics, really hurt the good things that the all new art was doing for this set. Overall, this is a 13 out of 25. This is a very middle ground score. TMNT has its ups and downs, and it would have helped a lot to have like any extra prints or just a few more new lands. There was like 4, well, and the life gains, but those kind of don't count. But it does do a great job on flavor and making references that TMNT fans will enjoy. If you've made it this far in the video, please drop a like for turn and subscribe for more land-filled content. If I missed anything, got anything wrong, or you just have questions, let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next latest loadout when Secrets of Strixhaven comes out.